G'day, I'm Mark from Self-Sufficient Me, and in this video I want to explain the pros and cons of direct sowing seed into your garden bed. The reasons for and against, and why I believe that direct sowing is still my preferred method over, say, sowing seeds in trays and then planting out later. Anyway, let's get into it. Before we do get into it, I'm down the back here because the neighbour's arced his mower up and the dogs and the other neighbours are going crazy. So I had to get away from it. At least you can hear me. So if you hear a little bit of noise in the background, sorry, I can't do much about that. This isn't a studio. And the other thing is, I've got to do some housekeeping and make an apology. I stuffed up my Patreon video that I released yesterday. I stuffed up the launch of it. I can't believe I did this, but I launched the page without all the rewards being published correctly. So those of you who went there, or a lot of people went there and were a bit confused because they didn't have the extra rewards. It only had one reward to sign up with. Anyway, I've fixed that up now. So feel free to go back to that Patreon page there if you did and got confused, or if you haven't already, visit my Patreon page, see what rewards there are on offer. Rightio, now let's really get into it. Firstly, what is direct sowing? Simply, direct sowing is when you sow seeds into the garden bed directly where they are to grow, instead of germinating the seed and raising the seedling in a tray or punnet, usually within a protected environment such as a greenhouse. With all things being equal, I prefer to direct sow for one main reason. The plant establishes and grows better than one that has been transplanted into the garden bed. Here are some pros for direct sowing. The first one is the plant only has to establish once instead of possibly 2 or even 3 times. And what I mean by that is, take for example, if you sow a seed into a pot or a tray, first of all let it grow a couple of inches high, then you prick that seedling out and you pot it up. You separate it from all the bunch of the other ones, pot it up into a smaller container so that it can grow and establish a root system. So that's the first time you disturb that root, or the root ball. And then the next time is when you plant that out into the garden, you then disturb the roots again by separating, as carefully as possible of course, the root ball from the pot and then planting it out. So essentially it's establishing once, growing down, you're pricking it out, it's establishing twice, and then when you plant it out into the garden, it's got to establish again and get that soil to mold around it and the roots to feeler out. And it's not just the roots you see too, it's the small microscopic roots on the roots, the hair roots, that are the ones that are, you know, filtering and scooping up the nutrients and the water. So they can take a while to establish, and that's why when you do plant out a seedling, you water it in really well, even if it's raining, so that that soil can get rid of the air pockets around it and the roots can settle quicker than normal. But on the other hand, if you plant a seed into the garden directly, it just establishes once, doesn't it? And also related to the first point is the second point, which is quicker. Sow seeds in the garden directly tend to establish faster than those that have been planted out. I've seen plenty of occasions where a seed that has even self-seeded, or you've germinated in the garden, I've germinated in the garden, compared to a plant that of even slightly older, a couple of weeks older, that's been transplanted out into the garden, often that seedling that's been self-sown, or that has been direct sown by me, can often overtake that other one and mature faster, because that one that's been transplanted in is still trying to establish again for the 3rd time. Hardening off, that's another point. When you take that seedling that has been grown in a pot and then plant it out into the garden, you really should harden it off, and that is bringing it out into this new environment that it's going to be in, away from its protected environment, and slowly every day give it a bit more sunlight, give it a bit more environment, and then plant it out so that it's hard enough, or it's hardened off, so that it can survive. Otherwise, if you plant it straight out from its protected nursery into the garden bed, into the full sun, bang, voila, it could die. On the other hand, direct sown plants, of course, they grow and adapt exactly to the environment, and they don't need to be hardened off. So again, for the second point, they establish faster, no hardening off required. Saves double handling and equipment. Well, you don't have to double handle. You don't have to plant it first in the potting mix, which costs money, in the pot, which costs money and time and effort, and then double handle it into the garden. Direct sow into the garden bed. It's cheaper, it's faster. And thinning out is another point. We often, when we direct sow, over sow and then thin out later. This is good for two main reasons. A, the extra plants compete with weeds and help to block them out of the gaps. And B, those seedlings we remove can be used as baby greens if they are edible, such as salad crops, etc. I'm a huge advocate for crowd growing, whereby we grow as much veggies in the one space as possible and more than recommended, and then harvest them for food whilst letting the remaining ones grow to full size as the thinning out process comes to an end. And the last point on why sowing seeds directly into the garden is beneficial and better, in my view, is root disturbance. And I know it's kind of related to the other points, but take for example, certain plants really hate being transplanted. Things like root crops, like carrots. If you transplant a carrot that's been grown in a pot and put it into the garden, it could die, it doesn't grow that well. Those type of plants are much better sown or self-sown into the garden bed directly, because you can imagine that taproot, that's what it is. The root that we eat from the carrot is one big taproot, and taproots are always susceptible because it's the main root of the plant, and they're always susceptible to disturbance. So if you're ever transplanting a fruit tree, I know we're getting off topic, you've got to protect that taproot. You can cut back all those other roots around it, the feeler roots and the feeder roots, you know, but if you disturb or cut that taproot, it's usually dead tree. So those were the reasons for direct sowing. Now let's get into some reasons why you might instead sow in trays or punnets rather than sow directly into the garden bed. First of all, pests and disease. That's a big one. Every place is different, every climate's different and all that, and that can influence what pests and animals might attack your seedlings. But seedlings and seeds are attractive to pests and animals. Little rats or mice will dig up your corn seeds and other seeds and eat them. They'll sniff around the garden. Possums will eat seedlings all the way off. Other insects will cut your seedlings. Slugs, snails will eat your seedlings. So if you are having issues like that in the garden, sometimes it's better to sow them in trays and punnets first and then plant them out once the seedlings are more mature. I'll give a good example. Here, possums love tomato seedlings, but only when they're really small, because the poison in the leaves and that isn't that developed quite yet. But once the seedlings get about 6 inches high, the possums leave the seedlings alone because they're repelled by the poison. Probably makes them a bit sick, and so they go on and eat something else. So that's a good reason for us to grow tomato seeds first of all in the nursery and then plant them out. With respect to diseases, you get some places, like I said, are different to others, but you can get diseases like dampening off, where seedlings will emerge and then they'll sadly perish because the soil is damp, or they get some type of virus and disease due to the dampness, and then it rots the stem and they die. So if that's an issue, again, it's not great to direct sow in those instances. Oh, well, the sun's going down and you can't see my shiny face, so I'll better move back up towards the noise so that you can see me better. All right, while I'm moving up here, I just want to point out a few things that might be quite interesting on the subject. So you remember, if you saw my video on raising passion fruit seeds, just by crushing the passion fruit into the pot, giving it a bit of water, and then pricking the seedlings out, that is a really good way to sow in pots and trays rather than direct sow. And you can see they're growing quite successfully now. This is only, you know, I don't know, about 6 or 8 weeks old. Have a look at that video if you're interested in it. But just about every plant now is taking off and growing really well. We should have fruit on that next spring, and that'll be very nice. And on this bed here, I had some chilies, and those chilies were a mixed chili lot, and I didn't know if the seed was viable or anything like that, so I just decided to throw a handful into, well, not a handful, but you know what I mean, sprinkle a packet and see what comes up, and then I transplanted them out into the garden. Those chilies aren't doing near as good. I mean, they're doing okay, got some fruit on them, and I'll be interested to see what varieties they are, because it was like mixed and I didn't have the names on the packet. But they're doing okay, but they're doing nowhere near as good as the self-sown varieties from last season that I just let grow and come up on their own over in the other bed. Both are chili crops and both are in, you know, reasonable soil. On the right-hand side of the chilies, I've just planted in, direct sowed some cucumbers. I want to try to get some cucumbers in before winter hits, or the real cold of winter hits. And I just basically poke them into the ground, and you can see pretty much all of them have come up, and that should get a nice crop of mini cucumbers so that we can pickle them before winter hits, and then the plants will die off pretty quickly. So the next reason why you might want to not direct sow into the garden is climate or weather conditions just aren't ready yet. So especially for people in cooler climates, I know the US and Europe and UK are all coming out of a really cold winter, that soil and the garden beds are going to be too cold to plant in for most crops. And what happens is sometimes the seedlings might germinate, or the seeds might even not germinate at all. But say they do germinate, those plants in that colder soil are going to have a harder time sucking up nutrients and water, because it doesn't work too well when the soil's too cold to be able to suck that water and nutrients up into the plant. And so the plant then gets kind of starved and then dies off. And when you plant out when it warms up, it's much better chance for those seedlings to survive. So that's why sowing in a nursery or indoors first, letting those plants establish until the weather warms up outside, is a better option. And you can also beat the last frost. People talk about the last frost. Those in cooler climates know it a lot better than I do. But if you plant your seedlings out too early or sow too early directly, those seedlings might come up because you have a good strike in the weather for a week or so, and then you get the coldness of winter. It has a bit of a relapse and you get a last or a couple of last frosts that can then destroy all those seedlings that have just come up and kill them all off. And you don't want that too, because that just wastes time. So by raising them inside first and then planting them out once you know there's no more frosts and the weather's warmed up, is sometimes a better option. Seed difficult to germinate, or you're not sure of the seed viability. Those are two fairly related reasons why you might want to plant them up in a container or a tray rather than direct sow. A good example here are these kiwi berries. I've never grown them before, and I know they're quite difficult to grow, particularly in my climate. And what I've done is put them in the fridge, in the freezer first and then in the fridge, and I'm not sure if these seeds are going to come up. There are other things, other plants that come to mind too that are difficult sometimes and do better raised in a controlled environment. Things like certain beans, exotic type beans like wing beans and New Guinea bean, gourds, different types of herbs, for example, also. Those can be better raised in seedling trays and then planted out once they get strong enough. So in this example here, I'm not sure if these are viable either. I mean, for seeds that have been old or you're not sure if they're viable, you can just place a sample of those seeds on some kitchen paper and see if they'll sprout, or instead of wasting space in the garden, you can just pot them up into a pot like this and then prick them out if they actually do strike. So I'll just whack some potting mix there and sprinkle these seeds on top, and hopefully they'll come up. And if they don't, I haven't wasted any garden space or an area to plant them out. Like that. Sprinkle a little bit of potting mix on top. Pat it down, give it a bit of a water. Put them in my mini nursery and Bob's your auntie. And the last point, you might think is a little bit rudimentary, but it does happen. Your garden bed is not ready. You might have a garden bed that you've just recently built or you're building and you haven't got soil in yet, or it's not ready, or you've laced it with manure and you're just waiting for that manure to mature and break down a bit so that it's not too harsh for when you want to plant your plants out or sow plants out. And in the meantime, you want to get those plants established and going so that once that bed is ready, you can then fill it with all sorts of plants and get it off to a great start. So yeah, garden bed not ready, maybe sow and grow your plants in the nursery first in a pot or a punnet, rather than trying to direct sow, obviously, where it's nowhere to go. So those were my main reasons why I prefer to directly sow seed into the garden bed, and also why you and I might sometimes prefer not to direct sow and to grow them in the greenhouse in punnets or in trays first and then plant them out. If you've got any other tips or comments you'd like to make, place them down below so that we can all learn from them. I read all the comments and I love sucking up your tips just like a plant sucks up nutrients. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to share it around as well and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. My Patreon, that's just been released. Check out the rewards, go to my Patreon page. The description is in the link, or the link is in the description below. Thanks a lot for watching. I think we've covered it all. And this mower guy, I'm just gonna go and strangle him. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.